My name is Amelia. I am 33 years old, and the last family barbecue changed everything for me. It was a summer afternoon in Seattle, warm air carrying the smell of grilled meat and laughter echoing across the backyard. Everyone was there. Uncles, cousins, neighbors. And in the middle of all that noise, my father raised his glass. "Amelia should start paying rent or get out," he joked. The words cut through the crowd like a blade. Laughter erupted. Even my stepmother Stephanie smiled, pleased at the humiliation. I sat frozen with a tight smile, my chest burning. None of them knew the truth. None of them knew that I had already bought my own house, a 3-bedroom craftsman hidden just 20 minutes away. While they laughed, I carried a secret powerful enough to change the balance of our entire family. In that moment, something inside me snapped. For 5 years I had been the quiet backbone of this household. I paid mortgages, utilities, groceries, even tuition for my stepsisters. More than $200,000 had slipped through my hands, sacrificed for a family that never once thanked me. Instead of gratitude, I got mockery. Instead of respect, I got a public stage where I was painted as a freeloader. I excused myself politely, walked back into the house, and shut the bedroom door. My hands shook as I leaned against the frame. The voices outside blurred into meaningless chatter. I pressed my palms against my eyes, trying not to cry, but tears fell anyway. Not from sadness, from relief. Because at last, they had given me the final confirmation I needed. Their laughter had freed me. For months I had been planning my escape in silence. Every late night at the office, every secret phone call with a realtor, every document hidden in my desk drawer had led to this point. The house was mine, the mortgage signed, the moving truck already scheduled. All that remained was timing, and my father, without realizing it, had set the stage perfectly. You see, humiliation sometimes burns away guilt. For years, guilt kept me here. I told myself they needed me, that I could not abandon them. But the truth was, they were never helpless. They had simply chosen to live beyond their means, leaning on me because I made it easy. And I had let them. That night, after the barbecue, I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet I had kept for years. Line after line of payments, every dollar accounted for. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, car insurance, Jessica's tuition, Lauren's vacations. The total climbed past 200,000, a mountain of evidence that I was no freeloader but the silent provider. I knew then that tomorrow would not be just another Sunday. It would be Independence Day. My own. As I closed the laptop, a strange calm settled over me. Outside, the barbecue went on with music and chatter. Inside, I packed the last of my things into a hidden suitcase. Clothes folded, documents sealed in a fireproof box, old photographs tucked away. My room, once cluttered with memories, slowly transformed into an empty shell. By morning, it would look as if I had never lived there. And that was the point. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, listening to the faint echoes of laughter drifting through the window. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Because I knew the next chapter was mine to write, not theirs, not dictated by obligations or guilt. When dawn broke, I would step into a life that belonged only to me. Morning sunlight spilled across my room, but instead of the usual dread, I woke with a sense of sharp determination. My name is Amelia, and I had reached the point where silence was no longer survival but surrender. The laughter from last night still echoed in my head, each chuckle replaying like a cruel refrain. Yet behind that humiliation, I carried a truth that none of them could erase. I was not a burden. I had been their provider. When I walked downstairs that morning, the house looked deceptively calm. The remnants of the barbecue lay scattered across the kitchen counter. Paper plates, sticky cups, and leftover food sat waiting for someone me to clean them. My father's words lingered in the air, heavier than the smell of burnt charcoal. He believed I owed them rent. Stephanie had smirked as if the idea was justice. And the girls, Jessica and Lauren, had laughed like spectators at a cheap show. None of them saw the reality that I had carried this household for years. As I brewed a pot of coffee, I thought back to where the cracks had started. My parents' divorce when I was 16 had been painful but manageable. It was when Stephanie entered the picture that everything shifted. With her came expensive tastes, and 2 daughters who saw my father's house not as a home, but as a stage for indulgence. Overnight, my stable life dissolved into chaos. Vacations, luxury cars, endless shopping trips. My father couldn't afford it, but he went along anyway, desperate to keep his new wife happy. I had once admired my father's strength. He worked construction, built homes with his own hands. Yet somehow, when it came to managing his own household, he crumbled. I watched him trade responsibility for temporary approval, blind to how it drained not just his savings, but also his relationship with me. College had been my escape. I worked, studied, built my independence piece by piece. By 23, I was financially free, paying my own rent, earning my own way. But 3 years later, the phone call came. My father's shaky voice asking me to come back. Just for a few months, he had said, until I get back on my feet. Those few months stretched into 5 years. 5 years where every paycheck of mine became the lifeline of this household. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that families helped one another. That sacrifice was love. But what I did not realize was that love without respect becomes exploitation. Standing in the kitchen now, I looked at the mess from last night and finally saw it clearly. This house was not my responsibility anymore. My father had chosen his path, and Stephanie had fueled it. The girls had grown into adults who demanded rather than contributed. And me? I had grown into someone who could no longer tolerate being invisible. Before I left that day, I placed 3 sealed envelopes on the kitchen table. Each contained a letter, one for my father, one for Stephanie, one for the family as a whole. I wrote about every payment I had made, every sacrifice hidden behind their laughter. The spreadsheet, printed and neat, lay inside each envelope. I wanted no debates, no excuses, only truth. As I tucked the letters under a salt shaker to keep them from blowing away, I imagined their faces when they found them. Shock, denial, maybe even shame, but I no longer needed their approval. My worth was not measured by how they reacted. It was measured by the steps I was about to take toward freedom. I walked back upstairs, pulled my suitcase from the closet, and zipped it shut. My car keys felt heavier than usual in my hand, as if they carried the weight of 5 years of silence. This was not an act of rebellion, it was an act of reclamation. And before I dive deeper into how everything unraveled, let me pause for a moment. If you have ever stood in a room where your own family dismissed your sacrifices, if you have ever been laughed at for daring to expect respect, you know how hard it is to find your voice. If you're listening now, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. And if my story resonates with you, make sure you hit like and subscribe, because none of us should ever feel alone when standing up for ourselves. With that said, I tightened my grip on the keys, stepped out into the morning air, and shut the door behind me. The house that had drained me for years stood silent, but inside me, a new voice had risen. Strong, unyielding, ready to fight for the life I deserved. The morning I drove away from my father's house, my hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized. Each turn of the road felt like I was peeling away layers of guilt that had bound me for years. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely steady, as if I had finally stepped into the truth of who I was. My name is Amelia, and for 5 long years, I gave up my independence to rescue a family that never once admitted they needed saving. I still remember the call that pulled me back into that house. I was 26 then, building my career, sharing a modest apartment with a friend, tasting the freedom I had worked so hard for. Then one evening my father's voice trembled over the phone. He said contracts had collapsed, debts were mounting, and without help he might lose the family home. Just 3 months, he promised. Help us get through the storm. I believed him. I packed up my life, left behind the first space that was truly mine, and moved back into my childhood bedroom. 3 months became 6, 6 became 12. Before I knew it, 5 years had slipped by. 5 years of covering mortgages, car payments, utilities, and groceries. 5 years of swiping my card for Jessica's tuition and Lauren's vacations. 5 years of paying Stephanie's credit card bills when she claimed she forgot. Every month I told myself it was temporary. Every month my resentment grew heavier, but my silence deeper. At first, my father thanked me. His gratitude was genuine, but gratitude turned to expectation. Soon, my support became invisible, taken for granted. Stephanie never once acknowledged my sacrifice. Instead, she made remarks about me, living rent-free, as if my paycheck wasn't keeping the lights on. Jessica and Lauren treated me like their personal bank, never considering that I had dreams too. And the worst part? I let it happen. I told myself I was being strong, that families helped each other. But as the years passed, I realized something ugly. I was not helping them grow. I was helping them avoid responsibility. They had grown comfortable with my sacrifice. They laughed while I worked late. They spent while I saved. They slept soundly while I lay awake, wondering if I would ever reclaim my own future. I think about that often. How easy it is to confuse loyalty with servitude. How love can blur into obligation until you no longer recognize yourself. I had become a stranger in my own life. My job, my promotions, my salary, they celebrated none of it. To them, I was not Amelia, the woman building a career in finance. I was simply Amelia, the provider. The one they could mock publicly while depending privately on every dollar I earned. Looking back, I see how clever exploitation can disguise itself. It wears the face of family. It uses the language of love. It convinces you that sacrifice is your duty, not your choice. That is what trapped me for so long. But the truth is simple. Duty without respect is not love. It is control. Driving that morning, I passed landmarks of my childhood. The park where I learned to ride my bike. The library where I hid after school to escape arguments at home. Each place reminded me of the girl I used to be, full of dreams of freedom, independence, and dignity. Somewhere along the way, I had let those dreams be buried under bills and expectations, but not anymore. I pulled into a small cafe to gather myself. Sitting there with a cup of coffee, I opened my notebook where I had written down every financial record from the last 5 years. The numbers were staggering. More than $200,000 funneled into a household that mocked me. Reading those figures was like staring at proof of my own silence. And I knew silence could not follow me into this next chapter. That was when I made a promise to myself. Never again would I sacrifice my future for people who laughed at my pain. Never again would I confuse being needed with being respected. My father had asked me for 3 months. He had taken 5 years. And I would not give them another day. I folded the notebook, placed it back in my bag, and whispered into the quiet of the cafe. It ends now. When I stepped back outside, the morning air felt fresher than it had in years. For the first time, I was not carrying their weight. I was carrying only myself. The hardest truth to admit is this: I wasn't living in my father's house. I was financing it. For 5 years, every brick, every light bulb, every grocery bag carried my name hidden in the receipts. Yet to them, I was still the adult child overstaying her welcome. I can still see the stack of bills I paid month after month. $2,000 toward the mortgage, $400 to $600 for utilities, another $200 each week for groceries. Car insurance, property taxes, surprise repairs when the roof leaked or the water heater broke. I handled all of it. I even covered Jessica and Lauren's emergencies, which usually meant tuition one semester and beach trips the next. The numbers never lied. More than $200,000 flowed from my hands into that house. And what did I receive in return? Silence, or worse, ridicule. Stephanie often referred to me as the tenant, though no rent check ever came from her pocket. The irony was sharp enough to cut. The woman whose credit cards I paid down treated me as if I were freeloading. Her daughters strutted through the halls in new clothes bought with my salary, yet looked at me with disdain when I came home late from work. My father, once my greatest supporter, shifted into someone I barely recognized. He stopped asking about my career, about the projects that kept me up at night. Instead, our conversations shrank into transactions. Did you pay the bill? When is the insurance due? There were nights when I lay awake in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was love or simply survival. I remembered the man who once sat at the kitchen table, helping me with math homework, telling me I was destined for greatness. Now that same man raised his glass at a barbecue, laughing at the idea of me paying rent, blind to the fact that his house stood because of me. I thought about leaving many times, packing my bags, walking out, cutting ties, but guilt chained me down. I told myself they needed me, that if I walked away, they would lose everything. And maybe they would. But the truth is, I had already lost so much. My savings, my independence, my voice. The cruelest part wasn't the money, it was being unseen. I wanted them to notice the long nights, the sacrifices, the career I was building despite carrying their weight. I wanted acknowledgement that I was more than their safety net. Instead, they mocked me. Stephanie dismissed my achievements as just work. Jessica sneered that I was married to my job. My father repeated the lie that I lived there for free. Each word carved deeper into me than any dollar I spent. But something shifted when I started documenting everything. At first, it was for taxes. Neat spreadsheets, itemized lists, receipts tucked away. Yet over time, those numbers became more than records. They became my proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that I wasn't freeloading. Proof that I was the backbone of a household that pretended I was dead weight. I began to look at the spreadsheet late at night, tracing the columns with my finger. It was like staring into a mirror that finally told the truth. Each figure whispered, "You kept them afloat." Each total screamed, "They would have drowned without you." And for the first time, I believed it. That belief was power. Quiet, growing power. It sat with me when my father brushed past my promotion to praise Jessica's theater role. It steadied me when Stephanie complained to her friends that I barely contributed. It anchored me when they laughed about rent while eating food I had bought. They thought I was powerless. But my silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Because I knew the day would come when silence would break. When the truth, written in black and white across those spreadsheets, would strip away their illusions. And I promised myself this. When that day arrived, I would no longer beg to be seen. I would show them. Success has a strange way of exposing the cracks in people. When my career began to rise, I expected pride from my family. Instead, all they saw was money. I had worked tirelessly at Pacific Northwest Financial Services, pouring myself into projects that demanded late nights and endless spreadsheets. When Harold, my boss, singled me out for a special acquisition project, I knew it was the chance I had been waiting for. 6 months of relentless effort, research, and analysis led to a string of profitable deals. My name was finally mentioned in boardrooms, my worth recognized by people who valued skill, not dependence. The reward came in the form of a promotion to senior financial analyst, a raise, and the kind of bonus I had once only dreamed about. I should have celebrated. Instead, I kept it quiet. At home, I downplayed everything. My family never asked how many hours I worked, how much pressure I carried, or how much I had sacrificed to earn this achievement. To them, it was a windfall meant to be absorbed into the household. I remember the night my first larger paycheck arrived. I came home exhausted but exhilarated, a tiny part of me hoping someone might say, "Well done." Instead, Stephanie's eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand, and she said, almost casually, "Maybe we could finally remodel the kitchen. It's outdated." Jessica chimed in, joking about needing money for a new car. My father, sipping his beer, didn't stop them. He didn't ask about the project. He didn't ask what it took. He just nodded along. That was the moment I realized how invisible my work had become. To them, I wasn't a professional building a future. I was simply a paycheck with legs. Still, I played the role they expected. I kept the bills paid. I smiled politely when they dismissed my long hours as workaholic tendencies. But at night, alone in my room, I felt a boiling resentment. Every success tasted bitter because it only fueled their entitlement. I began to hide pieces of myself. When colleagues congratulated me, I celebrated quietly at the office, then came home and acted like nothing had changed. When Harold praised my leadership, I tucked the words away in my heart, knowing I'd never hear anything like it around my father's dinner table. My career soared, but my spirit at home sank deeper. Yet through that bitterness came clarity. My achievements weren't theirs to exploit, they were mine to protect. And if I didn't start guarding them, I would lose not just my money, but my sense of self. So I began to separate my worlds. At work, I was Amelia, the analyst, sharp and respected. At home, I was Amelia, the tenant, the one who owed rent despite paying everything. It was a double life, and I knew it couldn't last forever. The tipping point came one Friday when Harold congratulated me in front of the entire team. Amelia's analysis made this acquisition possible, he said, handing me the performance bonus $65,000. Applause erupted, and for a moment, I felt seen, truly seen. I smiled, but inside, I was already making a decision. That money would not vanish into my family's endless appetite. That money would be my key. That night, as Stephanie rattled on about Jessica's community theater role and my father boasted about Lauren's beauty school acceptance, I stayed silent. I didn't mention the bonus. I didn't mention the praise. And when Stephanie circled back to the idea of a new kitchen, I nodded vaguely, knowing the truth. I had just bought my freedom. Looking back now, I wonder how many of you have ever had a moment like that. A triumph that should have been celebrated but instead was dismissed or overshadowed by others' demands? If you've lived through something like this, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Because those are the moments that test us, that force us to choose between pleasing others and protecting ourselves. That night, lying in bed with the bonus check hidden in my drawer, I whispered to myself, "This ends here." It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity. And once dignity wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. The night I hid that $65,000 bonus in a new bank account, I felt like I was carrying a forbidden secret. Not shameful, but sacred. For the first time in years, my money wasn't vanishing into someone else's shopping spree, tuition bill, or spa appointment. It was mine. Mine to protect. Mine to build a future with. Opening that account felt like breathing after holding my breath for 5 years. I walked into a branch downtown during my lunch break, careful not to leave any trace that my family could stumble across. I gave the teller my information, signed the paperwork, and slid the deposit across the counter. As I watched her count the bills, I thought, this is the beginning of my freedom. From that day forward, I created 2 versions of my financial life. The visible one where my paycheck still flowed into the joint account that handled the mortgage, utilities, and groceries. And the invisible one where every extra dollar, every raise, every bonus, slipped quietly into my private account. It was a system of survival. I calculated exactly how much I needed to keep up appearances at home, and the rest went toward my escape. I became meticulous. Investments, savings, automatic transfers set to trigger the moment my paycheck landed. I learned strategies at work and applied them to my own portfolio. For the first time, I wasn't just working to stay afloat. I was working towards something bigger. But secrecy carried weight. Each time Stephanie hinted at extra money for renovations, each time Jessica asked for another loan, each time my father joked about me living rent-free, I bit my tongue. I smiled. I nodded. Inside, I wanted to scream, I am planning my way out of this prison, and you don't even see it. There were moments when guilt gnawed at me. On Sunday mornings, I'd hear my father whistling while making coffee, oblivious to the fact that I was shifting funds behind his back. Sometimes Lauren would show me a dress she bought with money I'd given her, and beam as if I'd done her a favor. Part of me whispered, they'll crumble without you. Another part fired back, they'll never stand until you step away. The day I started house hunting was the day my life turned from endurance to anticipation. My friend Zoe introduced me to a realtor she trusted, and we began looking quietly, slipping between showings during my lunch breaks. It felt surreal, stepping into open houses with polished floors and bright kitchens, imagining a life where the bills were mine alone and no one laughed at my sacrifices. Every viewing filled me with both excitement and terror. What if they found out? What if I never got out? But I pressed on, fueled by the vision of freedom. After 2 months of searching, I walked into a 3-bedroom craftsman-style home 20 minutes from downtown. It wasn't flashy. The paint needed freshening, the kitchen could use an update, but when I stepped into the backyard, where a single maple tree cast shade over a small patio, something inside me settled. I pictured drinking coffee there in the morning, in silence, without anyone asking for money or mocking me in front of guests. It wasn't just a house, it was a promise. Signing the mortgage papers was both terrifying and exhilarating. I lied at work, telling them I had a medical appointment, so I could sit in a quiet office and scrawl my name across document after document. With every signature, I felt a chain loosen. Driving back that afternoon, the weight of the secret nearly crushed me. But alongside the fear was a rising strength. I had taken control of my future, even if no one knew it yet. That night, when Stephanie rambled about Jessica's rehearsal and Lauren's plans for beauty school, I stayed quiet. I looked around the table, at the people who thought they owned my future, and thought, "You have no idea. In a few weeks, I'll be gone." I went to bed with my heart pounding, not from dread, but from hope. For the first time in years, I had something worth protecting, something that belonged only to me. And I promised myself, no matter what storm came next, I would not let anyone take it away. The first night I held the keys to my new house, I didn't sleep. I placed them on my nightstand and stared at them in the dark, listening to the steady tick of the clock. Those keys were more than metal. They were freedom carved into shape, a future I had built in silence. The house was modest compared to the one I had grown up in, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, one tucked away for an office, another waiting for guests, and the master room that I could finally call my own. The kitchen had outdated cabinets, but the counters gleamed under the light. The living room felt open, airy. And that backyard, my backyard, with the maple tree swaying like a quiet guardian. It wasn't perfect, but it was safe. I moved in slowly, piece by piece, orchestrating the logistics with military precision. Movers were booked under my work schedule. Deliveries arrived when my family thought I was at the office. Zoe, ever my confidant, helped me smuggle boxes into my car trunk, which I parked streets away to avoid suspicion. Each day, the weight of the secret grew heavier, but so did the thrill. At home, nothing changed on the surface. I still paid bills, still handled groceries, still played the role of dependable Amelia. Stephanie continued her sharp comments. Jessica borrowed my car without asking. Lauren asked for money for beauty school applications. My father sat at the head of the table, pretending everything was normal, and maybe it was for them. But for me, the countdown had begun. The plan was simple. I would wait until the annual barbecue, the one day of the year when the entire family gathered and everyone was distracted. Once it ended, I would vanish. My letters, printed and folded, sat sealed in a folder hidden beneath my bed. Each one detailed exactly what I had paid. More than $200,000 over 5 years. Proof that I had been their foundation, not their freeloader. I would leave those letters behind, and when they found them, I would already be gone. But nothing prepared me for what actually happened at that barbecue. That afternoon, I worked from dawn. Marinating meat, chopping vegetables, baking desserts, setting tables with the blue and white cloth Stephanie insisted on renting. Guests arrived by 2 o'clock, uncles, cousins, colleagues, neighbors. The yard buzzed with conversation, laughter, and music. I circulated like a ghost, carrying trays, smiling politely, serving drinks. Inside, my chest throbbed with exhaustion and the knowledge that this was the last time I would ever do it. As dinner wound down, my father stood to make his usual speech. He raised his glass, proud as ever, and praised Jessica's theater role. Applause. He praised Lauren's acceptance into beauty school. More applause. And me? Nothing. My promotion, my bonus, my years of sacrifice erased. Then Stephanie, with a mocking smile, told everyone I practically dated my office. The laughter cut through me like glass. And then, the final blow. My father, emboldened, announced it was time for me to start paying real rent. $1,000 a month, he said, for the privilege of living under his roof. His words rang out like a sentence passed in front of 30 guests. The crowd laughed, raising their glasses as if it were a joke. But it wasn't a joke to me. It was humiliation branded into my skin. I smiled faintly, excused myself, and walked inside. Behind my closed door, I let the tears fall. Not from weakness, but from clarity. That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. The barbecue was not just a family tradition. It was my breaking point. And that night, as fireworks cracked in the distance, I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, they will learn everything. Tomorrow, I will be free." Because here's the truth: you can endure years of silence, but it only takes one moment of disrespect to wake up the fire inside you. And before I tell you exactly how I left, how I executed my plan with every detail mapped out, let me ask you this. Have you ever been pushed so far that you knew, without a doubt, there was no going back? Share it in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one. And if you're still with me, stay tuned. What came next changed everything. That night after the barbecue, I sat on the edge of my childhood bed with swollen eyes and trembling hands. The house was buzzing with laughter outside my door, as if nothing had happened, as if humiliating me in front of 30 people was simply another family joke. But inside my room, I felt something inside me snap clean in two. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was done. The barbecue had given me exactly what I needed, the final confirmation that leaving wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. Any guilt I carried about abandoning them evaporated with those words. Pay rent or get out. They had already chosen for me. I reached under my bed and pulled out the folder I had been preparing for months. Inside were 3 letters and a spreadsheet so detailed it could make an accountant blush. Every dollar I had spent was recorded. $200,000 in mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, car insurance, property taxes. Tens of thousands more handed directly to Jessica and Lauren. 5 years of my life reduced to neat columns and totals that couldn't be ignored. I sat at my desk and began drafting the final versions of the letters. The first was to my father. It was firm but respectful, outlining exactly what I had paid and why I could no longer continue. I wrote that I loved him, but love without respect had broken me. The second was for Stephanie. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I detailed her shopping sprees, her credit card debt, her manipulation. I ended it with a reminder. Responsibility cannot be outsourced. The third was for the household in general. It wasn't an apology for leaving. It was a statement of fact. I was done funding their lives. By the time I finished, the laughter outside had faded, the guests had gone, and the house was still. I placed each letter in its envelope, sealed them, and slid them into the folder with the spreadsheet. Tomorrow, they would find the truth waiting on the kitchen table. But I didn't stop there. I spent the next hour moving the last of my belongings into the trunk of my car. Clothes, books, personal files, all packed and hidden away earlier in the week, were ready to go. Only a few essentials remained in my room. A bed, a dresser, bare walls. I wanted them to see the emptiness when they opened my door. To understand that I was gone, not bluffing. At dawn, I set my alarm for 6 o'clock. I lay in bed one last time, staring at the ceiling where I had stared countless nights, but this time peace slowly washed over me. I knew tomorrow morning, while they were still asleep or distracted with errands, I would walk out of this house not as their safety net but as my own person. The morning came quietly. I woke to sunlight streaming through the blinds. Birds chirped outside, as if mocking the heaviness of what I was about to do. I moved quickly, showered, dressed, and stripped the sheets from my bed. I folded them neatly and placed them at the foot of the mattress. My room looked eerily like it had before I moved back, empty, impersonal, a space waiting for someone else. I carried my suitcases down the stairs one by one, careful not to wake anyone. Each trip felt like shedding another layer of burden. By the time the last box was in my car, my chest felt lighter than it had in years. Back in the kitchen, I brewed a pot of coffee. The smell filled the air, warm and familiar. But this time, it wasn't for them. It was for me. I placed the folder with the letters on the table, weighed down by the salt shaker, and beside it, I set a plate of pancakes I had cooked out of habit. My final gesture. Not revenge, not pettiness, just closure. At 7:30, I heard footsteps upstairs, my father heading for the shower, Stephanie shuffling in her slippers. My heart pounded, but I didn't falter. I grabbed my purse, my travel mug of coffee, and slipped out the door before anyone could see me. As I backed the car out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I refused to. The house that had drained me for 5 years grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. Ahead of me, the road stretched wide and open. For the first time, it belonged to me. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. That morning, it whispered through the hum of my engine and the weightless air in my chest. You're finally free. The morning I left, my car was packed tight with everything I owned. Boxes of books, bags of clothes, a file box with years of paperwork proof that I had carried this family on my back. The letters sat waiting on the kitchen table, my final word to people who had mistaken my silence for weakness. I drove straight to Zoe's, my best friend and co-conspirator. She was already waiting in her driveway with coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. The moment she saw my packed car, she grinned wide. "Today is your Independence Day," she said, hugging me so tight I almost cried. We caravanned to my new house, her car leading the way, the movers scheduled to meet us at 9. The drive felt like a blur. Streets I had driven 1,000 times, suddenly transformed into a gateway to freedom. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see my father's car chasing me down, demanding I turn back. But the road stayed empty. Only me, Zoe, and the life waiting ahead. The movers arrived on time. Furniture I had purchased quietly online now filled the empty rooms. A bed for me, a sofa for the living room, a small dining table for dinners I could enjoy without judgment. The house echoed with possibility. By the time we finished, I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes, overwhelmed by both exhaustion and joy. We ate sandwiches on the sofa, laughing about how bare the place looked. It didn't matter. The emptiness wasn't lack, it was freedom. It was a blank canvas. As Zoe raised her water bottle in a toast, she said, "To your new beginning." And for the first time in years, I clinked mine back with a smile that reached my eyes. By the afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I checked my phone, missed calls, dozens of texts. My father, Stephanie, even Jessica. The messages ranged from confusion to outrage. "Where are you? What's going on? How could you do this?" They had discovered my empty room and the letters. I could picture them reading the spreadsheet, their eyes widening at each figure. $200,000. 5 years of bills, loans, groceries, and tuition. Written proof that I had been their lifeline. A small part of me wanted to respond, to explain, to soften the blow. But another part, the stronger part, told me to wait, to let them sit with the truth. Zoe noticed my hesitation. "You've given them 5 years, she said firmly. "They can give you 24 hours. She was right. So I set my phone aside and turned my attention back to my house. I unpacked clothes into my closet, placed books on shelves, framed photos on the dresser. With every item, I was staking a claim to my own life. This was mine. No one could take it, dismiss it, or laugh at it. When evening came, the silence of the house wrapped around me like a blanket. It wasn't the silence of resentment I had endured at my father's, it was peace. I cooked a simple dinner for one, sat at my new table, and raised a glass of wine to myself. For the first time, I didn't feel like a provider, a tenant, or an ATM. I felt like me. Still, the buzzing phone on the counter reminded me that peace wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later, I would have to face them. To hear their excuses, their anger, maybe even their tears. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had proof. I had boundaries. I had a home. Looking back now, I wonder how many of you have ever had to gather the courage to finally walk away from people who took you for granted. To cut off the endless giving and say, "No more"? Tell me in the comments, because those moments of courage deserve to be spoken aloud. not buried in silence. That night, I curled up in my new bed, with moonlight spilling through the windows. The house creaked softly, settling around me, welcoming me. And for the first time in 5 years, I fell asleep without worrying about anyone's bills but my own. Tomorrow, there would be calls to answer and confrontations to face. But tonight was mine, and I intended to savor every second of it. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the bare windows of my new bedroom. For the first time in years, I woke up refreshed, without the heavy weight of obligation pressing on my chest. I brewed coffee in my quiet kitchen, savoring the sound of nothing but the drip of the pot. No voices asking for money. No demands, just silence. Peaceful, unbroken silence. But peace didn't mean escape. My phone lit up again with calls and messages, 15 missed calls from my father, half a dozen angry texts from Stephanie, and a string of confused ones from Jessica. I skimmed through them, my stomach tightening, but I refused to reply. Not yet. They had my letters. They had the spreadsheet. Now it was their turn to sit with the truth. By noon my phone rang again, but this time it wasn't home. It was reception at work. "Amelia," Marissa said nervously, "your family is here. They're insisting on seeing you." My blood ran cold. They hadn't waited for me to respond, they had come to my office, barging into the one place I thought was safe. I called Harold immediately. My voice shook as I explained. He didn't hesitate. "I'll come with you," he said firmly. That small sentence steadied me more than I realized. Together we rode the elevator down. When the doors opened, there they were, my father pacing near the reception desk. Stephanie perched in a chair, arms folded, face tight with fury. Jessica stood stiff, glaring, while Lauren lingered behind them, wide-eyed. Heads turned as coworkers whispered. I wanted the floor to open and swallow me whole. My father spotted me first. "Amelia, what the hell is going on? You can't just disappear." His voice carried across the lobby, sharp and desperate. I held up my hand, forcing myself to stay calm. "This is not the place, Dad. I'm at work." Stephanie shot up from her chair. "We have bills due, Amelia. Bills you always pay. You can't do this to us." Before I could respond, Harold stepped forward. "Mr. Davis," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "I'm Harold Wilson, Amelia's supervisor. Let's take this somewhere private. I'd hate for this to affect her professional reputation." My father froze, realizing the eyes around us. Appearances mattered to him, always had. He reluctantly agreed, and Harold led us into a small conference room. The moment the door shut, Stephanie exploded. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The mortgage is due, the utilities, Jessica's tuition. You can't just walk away." I sat still, hands folded in front of me. I didn't just walk away. I left everything documented. 5 years of records, over $200,000 I've paid. I turned to my father. "Did you even read the spreadsheet?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Those numbers can't be right." "They're exact," I said firmly. "Every mortgage payment, every grocery bill, every tuition check. I kept receipts for everything." The room fell quiet. My father's shoulders slumped slightly, but Stephanie pressed on. "Even if that's true, you can't leave us hanging." "Yes, I can," I replied. "Because families support each other. What's been happening is not support, it's exploitation. Dad makes $90,000 a year. That's more than enough to live on. If you adjust your spending, Jessica and Lauren are adults. They can work. You can too, Stephanie. I will not carry this anymore." Jessica's arms crossed tight. "So you're just going to let us lose the house? Some sister you are." I met her glare. "You're 26, Jessica. You've been in and out of community college for 6 years. Instead of mocking me, maybe it's time you get a job and contribute." Her mouth fell open. Lauren looked down, ashamed. My father's voice softened. "But we're family. Families help each other." "Yes," I said quietly, "they do. But help should never be one-sided. I've sacrificed everything, my independence, my savings, even my chance at a normal life. And still, you mocked me in front of everyone. That was the moment I realized I wasn't your daughter anymore. I was your bank account." For a long moment, no one spoke. My father's eyes dropped to the table. Jessica scowled. Stephanie pursed her lips, furious but silent. Only Lauren whispered almost to herself. I didn't know you paid for everything. I looked at her. Now you do. I stood, my voice steady. I'm not coming back. I'm not paying another bill. It's time for you all to live within your means. I pushed back my chair and walked toward the door, Harold opening it for me. Behind me the silence was deafening. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't weighed down by their needs. I was standing tall, carrying only my own. When I walked back into the office after that conference room confrontation, my legs felt like stone. I half expected the ground to crack beneath me, or for my father to burst through the door demanding I return home. Instead, the only thing waiting on my desk was a neatly wrapped sandwich and a cup of coffee. A small note rested on top in Harold's handwriting. Thought you might miss lunch. Hope everything is okay. That simple act of kindness hit me harder than I could have predicted. My family had drained me dry for 5 years, and the only gratitude I received was mockery at a barbecue. Yet here was my boss, a man who owed me nothing outside of work, noticing my struggle and caring enough to feed me. It was a reminder that respect didn't have to be begged for. In healthy relationships, it was given freely. I ate quietly, staring at the messages piling up on my phone. Another wave of texts from Stephanie. More missed calls from my father. Even Jessica had chimed in with a venomous line. How could you abandon us like this? I didn't reply. Not yet. I needed space, and more importantly, they needed silence. Silence forces people to face themselves. That night, I returned to my new home, exhausted but strangely lighter. I unpacked a few more boxes, arranging books on the shelf, hanging photos that reminded me of who I was before the weight of obligation. My house was still sparse, but it pulsed with possibility. Every nail I hammered into the wall felt like staking a claim to my independence. A week passed with minimal contact. My father sent the occasional text, questions about bill deadlines or account numbers. I answered factually, nothing more. Stephanie stayed silent, which was a relief. Jessica fired off one angry message accusing me of betrayal. I deleted it without responding. But Lauren surprised me. She texted twice, once asking how I was doing, and later letting me know she had applied for a job at a local coffee shop. That small spark of initiative gave me hope. Maybe she was ready to stand on her own after all. Then, on Friday evening, my phone rang. It was my father. For a long moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me knew I needed to pick up. His voice was quieter than I remembered. Amelia, I've looked at your records. All of them. I didn't realize how much you've carried. There was a pause, and then the words I never thought I'd hear from him. I'm sorry. I sat down heavily, gripping the phone. 2 words, small, but monumental. They didn't erase 5 years of neglect or the sting of public humiliation, but they cracked open the possibility of change. He hesitated before continuing. Stephanie and we'd like to see your new home. Maybe come for dinner, if you'll have us. My immediate instinct was to refuse. This house was my sanctuary, a space untouched by their demands or dismissals. Inviting them in felt like letting a storm through the door. But part of me also knew that if there was ever going to be a healthier future, we had to face each other on new ground. My ground. Saturday evening, I said finally. But there are conditions. Respect. No arguments. No demands. I understand, he said softly. The next day, I found myself cleaning with more energy than I'd had in years. Dusting, vacuuming, setting the table with dishes I had picked out for myself. I roasted chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, bought fresh bread from a bakery down the street. Dessert was a store-bought cheesecake, simple but intentional. I wanted them to see I could thrive on my own, that independence didn't mean isolation. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, all 4 of them stood there, my father, uncertain and subdued. Stephanie, lips tight but silent. Jessica, sullen, her eyes scanning everything critically, and Lauren, curious, almost impressed. "Welcome," I said, stepping aside. My voice was steady, though my heart pounded in my chest. They entered, their eyes roaming over the space. Hardwood floors, modest furniture, a dining table set for 5. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. And for the first time, I felt the shift in power. This was no longer their territory, it was mine. As we sat down to dinner, the air was thick with unspoken words. My father finally broke the silence. "You really did it," he said, glancing around the room. "Bought your own place?" I nodded. "Yes, I did. And for the first time in years, I felt proud, not for what I had given to them, but for what I had finally given to myself." The tension in the room was almost physical as we sat around my small dining table. I had chosen the menu carefully: roast chicken with herbs, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, and cheesecake. Simple, elegant, affordable. Every detail was intentional. I wanted them to see that I didn't need extravagance to build a life worth living. For a while, the conversation stayed surface level. Lauren complimented the food, her voice genuine. Jessica rolled her eyes but stayed quiet, stabbing at her plate. Stephanie made half-hearted remarks about how cozy the place was, her tone edged with disdain. My father said little, his eyes roaming the room, perhaps noticing how different this house felt from the one I had left behind. Finally, he cleared his throat. "It's a lovely home, Amelia. You should be proud." Those words landed differently than I expected. They weren't grand, but they were honest. For the first time in years, I felt him trying. Then Stephanie couldn't hold back any longer. "It's nice," she said sharply. "But small, isn't it? After living in our house, this must feel like a downgrade." I placed my fork down calmly. "Actually, it's perfect for me. Just the right size. And most importantly, it's mine. Paid for with my salary, not borrowed from anyone else." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Jessica muttered, "Sure, now that you're not paying our bills." "Jessica," my father warned, his voice carrying weight this time. She fell silent, glaring at her plate. I leaned back, folding my hands. "Let's be honest about what's happening here. My mortgage is manageable because I'm no longer paying yours. That's not an attack, it's a fact. And now, you all need to figure out how to live within your means." My father sighed heavily, his face lined with something I hadn't seen in years: humility. "We're working on it. I pulled money from my retirement to cover this month's mortgage and bills. Not ideal, but it gives us time to adjust. We've even started talking about downsizing." "Downsizing?" I echoed, surprised. He nodded. "The house is too big with you gone. And Jessica and Lauren, they're looking for jobs." Lauren perked up. "I got hired at Starbucks. I start training next week." Something warm flickered in my chest. "That's wonderful, Lauren. I'm proud of you." Jessica rolled her eyes. "I've got an interview at Nordstrom, sales associate, hardly my dream job." "It's a start," I said gently. "Retail builds skills you can use anywhere. Everyone starts somewhere." Stephanie's expression soured as she added reluctantly, "I'm considering returning to real estate. I still have my license." Her voice was tight, as if the admission cost her pride. "That's good," I said. "It'll be an adjustment, but it's possible. Many families live comfortably on far less than $90,000 a year." The room fell quiet again. For a brief moment the silence felt different, not hostile, but reflective. Then my father looked directly at me. "I owe you an apology. A real one, not just the text I sent. After looking at those financial records, I realized how much I failed you. I let you shoulder everything. I let myself believe it was okay because you were strong, and I was weak. I'm ashamed of that." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them away. "Thank you for saying that, Dad. It means more than you know." Stephanie shifted uncomfortably. Her hands twisted in her lap before she finally spoke. "I also need to apologize. I told myself that since you had a good job, it was fine to rely on you. I didn't want to work. It was selfish. I see that now." Her voice wavered, and though part of me doubted the depth of her sincerity, another part recognized the courage it took to admit it aloud. I nodded. Thank you for acknowledging it. Jessica stayed silent, her jaw clenched. But Lauren's voice broke through, soft but clear. I didn't realize. I thought Dad handled everything. I'm sorry I was clueless. And I'm grateful for everything you did. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of hope that change was possible. Maybe not with all of them, but with some. As we finished dessert, I felt the heaviness in my chest begin to shift. The years of resentment weren't gone, but perhaps they no longer defined me. Still, as I cleared the dishes, one thought lingered in my mind. Apologies were words. What mattered now was action. Would they really change? Or was this just another way to keep me tethered? And here's where I'll leave you with a question, because this is where the story takes a turn. Can people who have taken advantage for years truly change, or is it only a temporary performance? Stay with me, because what came next forced me to find out. The night after their visit, I sat alone in my quiet house, replaying every word in my mind. My father's apology, Stephanie's reluctant confession, Lauren's sincerity, even Jessica's silence. It had been the first time in years that we had gathered without me footing the bill, and for once, the weight wasn't on my shoulders. But apologies, I reminded myself, are only as good as the actions that follow them. The following week brought the first signs of change. My father called me one evening, his voice subdued. We've met with a financial advisor, he admitted. She's helping us set a budget based on my salary. That alone felt monumental. For years, budgeting was a word that didn't exist in their vocabulary. He went on to say they were considering selling the family home. It's too big, he said softly. And it's tied to too many debts. We're looking at smaller places nearby. It won't be easy, but it's time. For the first time in a long while, I heard something new in his voice: responsibility. Lauren texted me 2 days later with a photo of her in a green apron, smiling sheepishly. First day at Starbucks. Wish me luck, I sent back. Proud of you. You've got this. It was a small step, but it was hers, and she had taken it without asking me for a dime. Jessica, on the other hand, was slower to shift. When we met for coffee, she leaned across the table, her eyes flashing. I don't understand how you could just walk away. Families stick together. Families respect each other, I corrected quietly. I spent 5 years paying for everything, Jess. And when Dad joked about charging me rent in front of everyone, you laughed. Do you have any idea how that felt? Her face flushed, and for a moment I thought she might apologize. Instead, she muttered, "It was just a joke." I shook my head. No, it wasn't. Jokes reveal truth. And that truth showed me exactly how little you valued me. That's why I had to leave. She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe she wasn't ready. Stephanie was the hardest to read. At times, she seemed to be making an effort, mentioning part-time real estate work, even attending one of Lauren's shifts to show support. But her pride was like armor, cracking only slightly under pressure. Whenever we spoke, her words carried an undercurrent of resentment, as if she still believed I had betrayed her by taking control of my own life. And yet, despite the tension, things were different. I could feel it. They were learning, slowly, painfully, what it meant to stand without me. When they came again for dinner 2 weeks later, I noticed subtle shifts. My father arrived carrying groceries, his contribution, not mine. Lauren talked excitedly about her first paycheck, modest as it was, and how she planned to save part of it. Even Jessica, though still prickly, mentioned her Nordstrom interview without asking for gas money. We ate around my small table once more, and this time the air felt less heavy. My father raised his glass, not in mockery, but in gratitude. To new beginnings, he said simply. And though part of me remained cautious, another part whispered, maybe this is possible. Still, I held my boundaries firm. I made it clear that my financial support was over. I wouldn't pay their bills, cover their debts, or rescue them again. If they wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on respect, not dependence. Driving home from work one evening, I thought about how much had changed in just a month. My house was slowly becoming a home: painted walls, framed photos, a garden taking shape in the backyard. My career was thriving without the constant drain of financial pressure, and my family, though far from healed, was beginning to glimpse what I had always wanted. A dynamic built on equality, not exploitation. It wasn't perfect. Jessica still resisted. Stephanie still bristled. My father still stumbled. But progress, however small, was progress. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. By the end of the summer, the changes in my family were undeniable. For years, I had carried them like a pack mule, bending under the weight of every bill, every demand, every unspoken expectation. But now, with the burden lifted from my shoulders, I could finally see how they were forced to stand on their own. My father was the first to surprise me. He sold the family home. I never thought he would do it. Too much pride, too much nostalgia. But the day the for sale sign went up, he called me. "It's time," he said simply. "The house was too big for us, Amelia. Too much to maintain. We found a smaller place in town. It's modest, but it's ours." His voice carried something I hadn't heard in years. Relief. Stephanie adjusted less gracefully. Downsizing bruised her ego, and she complained often. But I noticed she no longer spent her afternoons lounging in cafes or shopping on credit. Real estate work trickled back into her schedule. She had clients again. Maybe necessity had pushed her, but she was moving. For once, she wasn't leaning on me. Lauren blossomed in ways I didn't expect. Starbucks was just the beginning. She picked up extra shifts, made friends outside the family circle, and started taking community college classes in business management. She even told me one afternoon over coffee, "I want to open my own salon someday. I don't want to depend on anyone again." Hearing that nearly brought me to tears. Jessica remained the most resistant. She took the Nordstrom job but wore her resentment like armor. When we spoke, her tone was clipped, her words sharp. She still viewed my leaving as betrayal, not liberation. But even she couldn't deny the paycheck she now cashed every 2 weeks. Responsibility had a way of catching up to even the most reluctant. As for me, my life expanded in ways I couldn't have imagined while living under their roof. My house became my sanctuary. I painted the walls soft gray, planted herbs in the backyard, and bought a hammock that swayed gently under the maple tree. I started hosting dinners for colleagues and friends, people who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give. Laughter in my home no longer carried the sting of mockery, it carried warmth. At work, I thrived. With fewer financial obligations draining me, I invested in certifications and training that elevated my career. Harold continued to mentor me, and within months, I was offered the chance to lead a major project. For the first time, I felt like I was building not just stability, but legacy. One evening, as the sun set over my quiet neighborhood, my father stopped by. He looked older, but lighter somehow. We sat on my patio, sipping iced tea. After a long pause, he said, "You taught me something, Amelia. I thought being strong meant never admitting weakness. But real strength? It's taking responsibility. I should have done that years ago." I swallowed hard, my chest tight. "Thank you, Dad. That means more than you know." We sat in silence after that, the kind that feels healing instead of heavy. But despite the progress, I never forgot the years of being unseen, mocked, and used. Those scars remained, reminders of what I would never allow again. Boundaries were no longer negotiable. If my family wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on mutual respect. And if they slipped back into old habits, I was ready to walk away again. What amazed me most was how life on my own didn't just heal me, it transformed me. I learned that independence isn't loneliness, it's freedom. It's waking up in a home that's yours, drinking coffee you bought with money you earned, making choices without fear of judgment. It's dignity restored. As summer turned to fall, I realized something else. The life I had now wasn't just an escape from the past. It was the life I had dreamed of quietly for years, a life I had finally built for myself. And yet, deep down, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because one final twist was still waiting, something that would test everything I had fought for. Autumn crept in with cool evenings and the maple tree in my backyard blazing with red leaves. My life had finally taken on a rhythm that felt like freedom. I woke early, brewed coffee in my own kitchen, and left for work with no one calling after me for money. At night, I came home to silence that felt like peace, not loneliness. But the twist I had been bracing for came one chilly October morning. My phone buzzed as I sat at my desk preparing for a client presentation. It was Lauren. Her message was short. Dad collapsed. Hospital. Please come. My heart lurched. Despite everything, he was still my father. I grabbed my coat, excused myself from the meeting, and drove straight to the hospital. The sterile smell of disinfectant greeted me as I hurried down the hall. Lauren sat in the waiting area, pale and anxious. Jessica stood stiffly beside her, arms crossed. Stephanie was pacing, her eyes red. "He's stable," Lauren said quickly, but the doctor said it was a minor heart attack. Relief and fear tangled in my chest. When I entered his room, my father looked frail against the white sheets, tubes, and monitors surrounding him. His eyes opened when he saw me, and a faint smile appeared. "You came?" he whispered. "Of course I did," I said softly, sitting beside him. In that moment, all the anger I had carried seemed to dissolve. Not erased, not forgotten, but quieted. He was vulnerable, human, no longer the towering figure who had once mocked me in front of our entire family. Just a man who needed his daughter. The days that followed forced us into close proximity again. I visited regularly, balancing work with hospital runs. I spoke with doctors, helped organize his medications, and ensured the bills were manageable not by paying them, but by guiding him through the insurance forms and payment plans. For the first time, I helped without enabling. There was a difference, and I clung to it. Stephanie was shaken. She tried to mask her fear with complaints, but I noticed she never left the hospital room for long. Jessica softened too, though she hid it behind sarcasm. Lauren, surprisingly, rose to the occasion, fetching water, checking in with nurses, sitting with him for hours. Responsibility was no longer optional, it was survival. One evening, as I sat alone with my father, he reached for my hand. His grip was weak but insistent. "Amelia," he said, his voice raspy, "I see it now. Everything you did for us. I should have protected you instead of letting you protect us. I was wrong." Tears welled in my eyes. I squeezed his hand gently. "What matters is that you see it now." That moment became a turning point. After his discharge, life didn't go back to the way it was. It couldn't. He was forced to slow down, forced to live within his means, forced to accept help not in money, but in presence. And for once, my family began functioning like a family should, sharing the weight, learning responsibility. For me, it was validation. Proof that I hadn't abandoned them. I had saved myself, and in doing so, I had forced them to finally stand on their own. As autumn gave way to winter, I realized something powerful. Leaving had not destroyed my family. It had transformed us. Painfully, imperfectly, but undeniably. And I had reclaimed not only my dignity, but also a chance at a relationship that wasn't built on exploitation. When I look back now, I see two lives. The first was spent in silence, burdened and unseen. The second began the moment I walked out with my packed car and a folder of receipts. The first nearly broke me. The second rebuilt me. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, you already know the hardest choices are the ones that save us. Sometimes walking away isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's the only way to teach others how to finally stand. If you found strength in my story, don't stop here. There are so many others just like this, stories of betrayal, of resilience, of breaking free. Click on the next video and stay with me, because you'll want to hear what happens when silence turns into power. Winter settled softly over my new neighborhood, bringing with it a calm I had never known. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling the world in a quiet stillness. From my kitchen window, I could see the maple tree in my backyard dusted white, its branches heavy yet graceful. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of coffee and let myself breathe. Life wasn't perfect. My father was still recovering, Stephanie still learning humility, Jessica still wrestling with resentment. But for the first time, Their struggles weren't mine to carry. They belonged to them, as they always should have. My role had shifted from provider to daughter, from enabler to witness, and in that shift I rediscovered myself. Every morning now begins with choice, not obligation. I choose when to work late, when to invite friends over, when to sit in silence under the maple tree. My money no longer disappears into someone else's debts. It grows, patiently, like roots spreading beneath the soil. Sometimes, guilt still whispers. But I remind myself of the truth. Saving myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. And in walking away, I didn't just reclaim my life. I gave my family the chance to finally confront theirs. On quiet nights, I light a candle and read in the stillness of my living room. No raised voices, no mockery, no demands, just peace. The kind of peace that comes only after a storm has passed. And as I sit there, I know this. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't always come with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it arrives like snow, soft, steady, transforming everything it touches. My story began in silence, but it ends in strength. And strength, once claimed, never leaves you.